My name is Merle Shang. I'm here with Craig Nanna, pastor of Transformed Church in Reading, Pennsylvania. And Craig, man, back in those early days of Transformed Church, tell us a little bit how the church got planted, how you guys planted Transformed Church here in Reading.
Yeah, so that was back in 1995. We actually just got back from the mission field in Peru.
Yeah.
And coming off the mission field, there was just a stirring in our heart. Actually, before we left for Peru, we always had this thing in our heart that we'd plant a church because our heart was for people who didn't know the gospel, people who were far from God. And so a church plant really makes that happen and reaching the unreached. And so we felt like before we were in Peru that we were going to be there for about 3 years, and we were going to come back and we're going to plant. We weren't sure where we were going to plant. Before we left for Peru, I had an open vision, and I've not had many of those, so it really stuck with me. And in that open vision, I saw a city that was very, very diverse. I didn't know it was Reading at that time.
Okay.
And I shared that with my wife, and she said, well, let's just do what we're doing in Peru first, and let's see what God says for that in the future. Little did we know we were back in the country in 6 months.
Wow.
And so God was actually preparing us already to get that within our spirit. So when we came back, we began to pray into that. We said, Lord, what do you have? Are you saying a new church plant? So at that time, Merle, I went to my grandfather's farm with a small tent and some water. And I said, God, if I don't hear from you, we're sunk. So we need to know what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so at that time on my grandfather's farm, which is about 4 hours from Reading, he began just to really put things in my spirit, confirm Isaiah 43, 18, 19. I'm doing a new thing. It's got to spring up. And so I just knew that, that something new, that God wanted to do that, something new.
Wow.
During that time, my grandfather's farm, my cousin shows up at the farm at that exact time, and she's from the Reading area. And I told her, I said, she asked me what I was doing down at the farm, and I told her I was just praying out in the, out in the woods. And she said, you should think about coming to Reading because it's very diverse,
Right.
with a Latino population, et cetera. And that was really in our spirit. So it was like God's orchestrated that timing and just to put that thought within my spirit. Went home, talked to my wife, and took my first trip out here to do a prayer walk in Reading.
Yeah. So how convinced were you that it was Reading? Like, when you started talking to your
I
cousin?
wasn't. I had no idea.
So it was a real step of faith for you then.
I have actually, I was in Reading once for a wedding, but I know no one in this area.
Wow.
So I had nothing to base it on. So it was a real faith walk, just to step out.
So walk me through kind of, what did you do next? And
Yeah, so the next step that we decided to do is I came out by myself and I did a prayer walk, on site, within sight, and just began to walk the streets of Reading, get a feel, sit on a bench, listen to conversations. During that time, I met this pastor, and he actually said, get in my car and I'll give you a tour, which was a really amazing God thing.
Yeah.
And so I got a whole tour during that first trip. Came back from that trip feeling like, there's something in Reading. It could be. It was definitely a divine maybe.
Yeah.
But
a divine maybe. I like that.
Exactly. But it was definitely a maybe.
Yeah,
We weren't for sure. So then the next step is, my wife and I decided to come out together, and we just put before the Lord, if you open up a door, because coming back from Peru, we didn't have anything. We sold everything thinking we were going to be in Peru 3 years. So we just said, Lord, if you open up a door for a home, because my wife was pregnant with our third. We had 2 toddlers. She was pregnant with a third, and we needed that stability. It wasn't like my wife and I just could do whatever we wanted.
Right.
We had kids involved, and so we prayed to the Lord to open up a door for a home. And during that time, Merle, again, God stamped His affirmation and confirmation on our faith walk by opening up a door for a house last minute before we left to go back to where we were living at the time. And there was an elderly couple that were moving south, and they, through a realtor connect, he says, I think there's a God thing happening here. Realtor ends up being a believer, introduces us to this elderly couple who were moving south, and they were praying for somebody to buy their house that would plant a church in Reading.
Wow, come on.
Pretty amazing.
Wow. God, man.
And their house was full of furniture, and we had no furniture, so it was great. Like we had God provided.
That's awesome. So, in your story there, I just hear so much of your posture of like, Lord will do anything. I mean, you were going to Peru, he redirected you. And then just spending time in prayer, committing that to prayer, committing that together in prayer, you and your wife, and just, those divine maybes, like, could this be God?
Yeah.
Could this be? And you just kept kind of walking forward, taking the next step, as it were. It wasn't all laid out for you. It wasn't a lot of times when people are planning churches, or anything in life, we want everything kind of like nailed down, secure, like it's obvious.
Right.
And that's not always how it goes. Like, God always requires faith, but he really led you in that. And looking back on the testimony, that's amazing. Tell me 2 or 3 principles that you learned through that time.
Yeah.
Just, walking with the Lord.
That's a great question. I think, one of them is a scripture here I just want to read out of Ephesians 3:7. It says, I became a minister according to the gift of the grace of God given to me according to the effective working of his power. And so that was a big one. It's the grace of God that calls us. And my wife and I knew that, because coming off the mission field in Peru, planning to be there 3 years, was not an easy transition. There's a lot of disappointment, discouragement as a result of it. The turn there in Peru. And so it's not like we had a lot of faith, but we knew the grace of God was on us and calling us to do this new thing. So we stepped out in his power, just trusting him to do it. And I think so often, like, we want to be, this, super, ready and prepared, but we're not always.
Right.
Often God will use our weakness so that he can be glorified in the midst of that. And preparation is very, very important, but God will take what you give him.
Right.
And so the grace of God, first of all, that calling, because when it gets, church planning is not for the faint of heart. And so when you know that God's called you, that'll keep you continuing to plant even when it's difficult. I think just 2 other quick things that are very important principles. If we would do it differently, we would have a team. We would do the legwork. We came out by a word of the Lord, trusting God. We tried to work with our present church at that time, but our church at that time did not have a vision for church planning. At that time, we did not know Dove International, and we weren't connected with any network that had a vision for church planning. So we were just trying to obey the call of God. But it would have been great to have a team that, do the legwork of having a team. Having a team will actually help you just really multiply your efforts as you're planting, because it's not just the vision of 1 or 2, it's a team that's doing this together. And you can go faster, further when you're doing it as a team. And there's an exponential effect then when you're working with a team. So I'd encourage team, and I also would encourage partnership. I think partnership in church planting is essential. I think the most successful church plants happen because of partnership. I'm talking partnership with church or a group of churches that have the finances and the resources and even the laborers that they'll sow in to the beginnings of that. Hey, I'll help you with worship for this season, or I'll help you with kids ministry, or I'll help you start because if you could start strong, that'll really get you begin in a way that really will establish that church. Because how you begin is so important. And my wife and I, we were Team Nana, and we did not have that partnership.
Right.
And so I just am all about partnership, and just really encourage you, if you're planning a church, like, do the legwork before you plant, to get team and to have clear partnership with a church or churches that are really standing with you practically, prayerfully, to see an effective church plant.
Yeah, so it's so important who you're connected to.
Yeah.
As a team, but then also as an organization or a church spiritual body.
For sure.
That's awesome. Great. So thanks for tuning in today. For more information and for more videos, go ahead and click below.